This mini presentation is on the evolutionary concept of adaptive radiation, which is defined as a burst of evolution with rapid divergence from a single ancestral form that results from the exploitation of an array of habitats. So basically, this means that somewhere in a species' ancestral past, there was a single species that experienced a change in environment, which required the species to adapt to the new environment niche that it found itself in. So, two ways that adaptive radiation kind of occur in a species would be one, the production of a new species, sort of like a hybrid to better suit the environment that they're in. And then another way would be adaptation of an old species to a new environment. So it's like it got really dry one summer and all that was left were really hard seeds because those are the only ones that survived the dry season. That would mean that only the birds with large beaks who could open the seeds would survive, and so they would pass on their traits to the next generations, unlike the birds who didn't have the big beaks, who more than likely died. So ecological factors are usually what would cause adaptive radiation, something like predators moving into the environment, lack of resources, or climate change. All of these things, or any of these things really, would cause the species that we're thinking about to have to change or adapt to the environment it finds itself in. So something like predators, they were looking at the animals running on the ground, so what the animals would have to do is change or basically camouflage themselves in order to hide from the predators. And therefore, these animals that would camouflage would be the ones sending out their genes into the next generation for more of their species to be camouflaged away from these predators. Something like lack of resources would cause the species to need to adapt because let's say that all that's available are large seeds and the birds with small beaks can only eat the small seeds, but there are a few birds in the population that can eat the large seeds. Those are the species of bird that would be able to survive through the lack of resources, and in turn they would pass on their genes to the next generation so that their offspring would be able to also survive something like a lack of resources. So some of the easier examples to understand when it comes to adaptive radiation would probably have to be the example of the Galapagos finches and the example of mammals during the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. Okay, so again, one of the more obvious and easier examples you can recall when thinking about adaptive radiation would have to be Darwin's finches. Present day, there are approximately 14 different species, but they come from a single ground-dwelling seed-eating finch species that left the established environment either from a storm or just to explore. Either way, they ended up in a new habitat where they had to adapt to survive. Each adapted for different diets, not really to adapt to the environment that they were in, but they adapted for the food that was around them. So now there are 3 ground-dwelling seed eaters like the ancestral species. There are 3 species that live on cactuses and seeds, and then there's 1 species that lives in trees and eats seeds, and then there are 7 species of finch that live in trees and eat insects. So each of these species of finch that are now alive today came from a single ancestral species, and that's basically the concept of adaptive radiation, is that a single ancestral species radiated into different species to adapt to the environment that they find themselves in present day. So another example of adaptive radiation would have to be the extinction of dinosaurs. So the dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago, but mammals showed up about 150 million years before that. So during the time of the dinosaurs obviously they hunted the mammals. But once the dinosaurs went extinct, the mammals came out of their hiding where they could basically live in their new environment without being worried about getting eaten. So when they moved out into their new environment, they had a better chance of getting larger because these mammals that were living during the end of the Cretaceous period were a lot smaller than the mammals we see today. So when they moved out of their hiding because the dinosaurs had died, they had a chance to become larger. So they adapted to their new environment and then they radiated out to the larger mammals we see today. So, a few things to remember about adaptive radiation would be that it is a single ancestral species that rapidly changes into a new species that is better fit for the environmental niches that surround it. So basically, the species starts off as a single species and then changes into a new species or many new species in order to ensure the survival of the lineage. So in the end, they're a new species, but they're still related to the old species. They just better adapted to the environment that they're in now. That's the end of the PowerPoint of adaptive radiation.